Hey everybody, welcome back to Collective. We have another awesome show for you today. It is the Days of Lavoie, as they
Gus,
continue every Monday.
Every Monday is a day to celebrate.
It is, it really is. We have an awesome show planned for you today. At least I have an awesome show planned for you today. But before we go anywhere, I do want to remind everybody to make sure they like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That way they get their little email saying the Collective is live, like we are right now. So, any thoughts? Anything on the top of your guys' mind? Any brewing stuff
Well,
coming up?
speaking of brewing, I am enjoying a fantastic Ethiopian Isla Bombay. Sorry, Julie. I forgot you were here. I forgot that I didn't send you any Isla Bombay.
Yeah, that must have got misplaced in the Canada
I forgot I sent it all
shipping.
to Andrew Bovard and Jasper and on to you. Oh, that was fun for me, not you. Sorry about that.
Good times, hey?
How does it taste? Is it good?
Well, Julie would know. I mean, the last time I sent some to her, it was magnificent. So
It's been so long, I forget.
it's been quite a while.
Shots fired.
We'll just let them kind of go back and forth for a little while.
Leaving the room.
All right.
Yeah, this could be the whole
you said,
podcast.
Are any
so-
thoughts brewing? I couldn't resist.
Oh man, Carl's joining us. Morning, Carl. Good to see you. And we got some other people watching as well, which is great. So we can dive right into the conversation if you guys would like, unless there's anything else on the top of your heads. No? Okay. Well, Trav had a specific topic that he wanted to talk about today. He'll be here in a short minute. So we'll just dive right into it. I'll kind of give you a little precursor to it as well. Mortality.
Cool.
So Trav had mentioned to me that a lot of times we get into these conversations, we kind of beat around the bush of the concept of mortality, of understanding our own mortality and accepting it and being able to move forward, but we never really discuss the idea of accepting or understanding our own mortality. So do you think that perhaps it is do you think it is a learned skill? Do you think like there is a point where you go, oh, look at that, I'm not getting out of this life alive? Or do you think we forget about it later on in life and then it kind of comes back to us? Any thoughts? Bueller?
I don't know about anyone else here, but I'll go with this. Every year that slips by is another year that confirms that it slipped by. I mean, you start feeling it, man. I don't know about all you young bucks out there, but you start feeling it. And I think that around 40-ish, I was starting to feel my mortality a bit more. But at 50, for sure, I was starting to see the trajectory. But now at 60 this year, or in October, man, I can feel it in my body. It's not just a academic thought process. It's not just an intellectual consideration. It's a physicality that you can feel. As we were just kind of laughing about before we jumped into this live, I'm now on the Wolverine juice. So I'm on the testosterone enanthanate. And I've just recently started that. And I got to say that it is almost like, an elixir of life. That testosterone has increased my... Hey, Evan, can you stop waving your hands around? Thanks. Boys, I'm doing a podcast. Please don't goof around in the backyard. So it's like an elixir of life in the sense that it brings that some additional youth to your program. It gives you faster recovery, better sleep, yada, yada, yada. But you don't realize it until you contextualize it. And so I was thinking about this morning when I put up my Instagram post, and it was about being hard. And I've heard this over the last few days. Dude, you're so hard. You're hard. You're a badass. You're hardcore, blah, 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 whatever. And I started thinking about, like, I ain't that hard. Or is everyone else far too soft? So I started contextualizing that. My buddies, the people that I hang out with, actually this crew right here, no one's soft. So my inner circle is all, well, Chance Burrell's okay. We'll make some exceptions. But there's the reality of who you surround yourself is what your definitions are. And my inner circle, the people that I bang with, are all hard. And so I don't consider myself overly hard in context of my friends, but I suppose we're hard in context of the norm, the general population, the normative value. And so that started getting me thinking about, am I hard? Am I soft? How to be harder? Is everyone else just so soft they don't understand hard? But it's the same for mortality. As I think about mortality, the only way to understand it is to contextualize it around yourself. So I look at my friends now and they're dying because that's what happens. You get old, you die. That's the cycle of life. And so as you get older, you're attending more and more funerals, and it sucks, but it's reality. It's the contextualized realization that no one's getting out of here alive. And so I think that mortality can be viewed through the lens of a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, and they might be the same, but I doubt it. So I think mortality is contextual to some degree.
I like that. I like that a lot. Trav, thanks for joining us. Thanks for jumping in at the last minute here.
Yeah, I had my timings wrong on that one, so I'm at the home office on this one.
All good. That was I should have confirmed with you. It's all good. So mortality, you wanted to talk to us about it? You got any direct questions or thoughts?
Well, there's something that I saw come up over and over again in the collective, and that was the concept of mortality being talked around or talked about. I saw Jeff Bosley. He shows a poster in the background behind him, and he had his life broken down into weeks. I thought that was interesting, and it gives a sort of a finite view to the amount of time that somebody has as a bit of a motivator to get at it. Chris Lee talking about saying the greatest gift that you can give a person is your time. And of course, your mortality, death, is what's going to give life value. It's going to give that time a sense of value. Without death, you have no value in life, just as if you had infinite funds, the funds become somewhat valueless. And then Dave Ward, of course, with Bushwookie there, and you had him on another episode there, and he says he hears this loud voice telling him to change the angle when he was pulling the trigger. And of course, and Shaun talking about a collective energy and different things. And it seemed to me that there were a number of questions that could come up in regards to our own mortality, which could revolve around what are we doing with the days that we have right now? How are we making the best of it? Perhaps touch on the spirituality aspect of it, because I don't think anyone has any answers for this, and people will lean on faith or spirituality as ways to be able to sort of draw a box around their idea of what life is all about. And then there's always that one final piece of we're always trying to push. We're always trying to grow. We realize that we have a finite amount of time here, and we're trying to do the most with it. When do we stop? When do we slow down? When do our priorities start changing and saying, maybe I shouldn't be striving so hard in this one direction, because as I move there, I'm not putting my attention on perhaps something else. There's a whole balance to it. And in men's mental health, there's a lot of push hard, grind, keep going. In women's mental health, there's a lot of it's okay not to be perfect. And I thought it was kind of an interesting concept when we look at that finite view of what we're doing. So a number of different topics, but those were sort of what we're kind of banging around in my head.
Indeed. There's quite a lot to unpack there. One of the but no, it's really great because that actually kind of falls in line with how I wanted this to kind of evolve into what we were talking about. Do you think that there is a difference? Let's go with Julie. Do you think there's a difference between the way you view your own mortality versus the way the men in your life view their mortality?
Well, I guess just picking up on Travis's point, he suggested that perhaps there is an expectation for men to push hard all the time, and women, it's okay maybe not to be perfect or to slow down. I would challenge that concept. I think in terms of women, there actually is a bit more pressure on trying to be perfect or fit that role model, whether it's social media driven or whether it's just expectations or pressures put on yourself to achieve and be perfect or to meet up to that expectation or role model in terms of whether it's body image. I mean, that's one big thing, especially for young women in sport or just in life in general. They have this role model or this expectation of how they should look or what they should say based on some of the role models that are out there. So I would say, I would challenge that concept and say that I think there is quite a bit of pressure on females to be perfect or to meet a certain expectation.
I would want.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, I agree with you 100%. I think there's a lot of expectations for women to be perfect and meet this unrealistic expectation. And my comment would be more along the lines of women's mental health is typically mentors in the female community, from what I've seen and talking with my wife and others, are saying you don't have to be perfect, as opposed to what we are constantly being bombarded with. Whereas men, I think, perhaps maybe at an early age need a bit of a kick in the butt saying, come on, guys, you can do more, keep going, right? There's a different sort of standard. So I was more looking at it from the mental health standpoint, but then again, that's from my male perspective. I could be off base on that one.
Seb, you got any thoughts on anything we've gone over so far?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive subject, but I think Julie and Travis are actually saying the same things. You guys are actually saying the same thing, just differently. But yeah, mortality is an interesting concept. I mean, we spend our entire lives with our heads in the sand, trying to pretend it's not there, and it's the boogeyman, and this is very North American culture-ish, because there's a lot of countries where death isn't perceived like that. Just think about Ghanaians or in Africa, in certain tribes, or in certain and everywhere in the world. I mean, there's a different view of mortality. We see mortality as this big, ghostly figure that's nefariously inclined or anything like that. I don't buy into the whole thing. So ultimately, we know we're all going there. So the sooner we make peace with this, the sooner the little things in life that are masquerading as other things that are actually the fear of death will stop taking over our lives. And I just really like the fact that from a professional standpoint, I was forced to embrace that very young. And that's a gift of the gods, as far as I'm concerned. And but whether you believe in gods or not is just whatever. But I truly believe that embracing mortality as soon as you can is the best way to go. But when embracing mortality, you also have to embrace the concept that what you're doing needs a purpose, because if you don't have that and you're embracing mortality fully, but you also don't have a purpose, now you're starting to create some issues or some potential issues in how you're exteriorizing your actions in life, right? Because why am I doing all of this if I'm going to die anyway? This is all finite, and what's the actual point, and what's and so those questions, those philosophical questions come into play. So it's important to understand that mortality is a thing, understand that we're all going that route, understand that the concept of time is absolutely skewed. I mean, think of it this way. If you look at somebody walking by at 98 years of age, but they have 4 years left to live, and you see a 7-year-old with cancer at Children's Hospital and they got 6 months to live, who's the older person? Really? I mean, and we let turns around the sun dictate how we think and feel about mortality. And something that Shaun said earlier was very interesting, and I agree with it. He said, it sucks as you're getting older, you start seeing people sort of depart your circles, by way of death or passing away or whatever the case may be. That is a luxury afforded only to the living. That is a privilege. There is, and we can look at it however we want. And yes, it is a burden. It's a burden and a curse, but it is a privilege to have the opportunity to see, the people you love go without wishing for that, obviously, and I think that all of us would take the spot of somebody we loved if we could, when the time comes. But it is a privilege reserved to the living to see others depart this world. So anyway, it's just a mindset thing, and there's a lot of philosophical things here, and there's a lot of things we can go down of. But I think the acceptance of it is a critical piece of maximizing and optimizing your life.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. One of the one of the points that I've always, I don't know, I guess, said has helped me throughout my life was the fact that I got into a major car accident when I was like 13, and it was bad enough that I went right to the hospital. I was unconscious for a while. I broke the windshield of a car with my head as it hit me. Like it was a bad scene. Excuse me, my throat's not doing well today, so excuse me all my coughing. But it gave me a taste of mortality at 13, where most people don't get that taste until later in life, or they get into a profession where.
But what does that mean to you?
Upon them. What it meant to me was the fact that I then had to go after what I wanted in those moments.
And have you for the last 2 decades?
For the last 2 decades?
That was my question.
For the last decade, probably not. Well,
right.
I can't even say that.
So how did you forget? You had this life learning lesson that you immediately forgot for the last 10 years.
I would say that I became focused on my kids and my family, and like I took myself out of the picture, and I started focusing on the those around me in my circle, which is it's kind of a toss up, because by putting myself on the back burner, I now have to deal with the repercussions of it, right? I have to deal with the fact that my body is starting to get older, and my physicality isn't there anymore, or isn't as effective as it was back in the day when I was 20 or 30. And but at the same time, I was able to start a family and move, buy a house and hang out with, and be able to be there for my family when they needed me. So again, I think mortality, especially the understanding of it, is kind of it's a balancing act, because you could strive for everything you absolutely want in every aspect of your life, but everything comes at a cost. So if you strive for the achievement or money or position or whatever it is you want to go traveling all over the place, that can take time away from family or relationships or interactions with others or whatever. So I think it's a bit of a toss up, but you're absolutely right in the fact that it does need to be managed, because if you don't manage it, then it just flitters off.
It does. I spoke about it specifically this morning in my Instagram post that I put up about being hard. What does it mean to be hard? And I know guys who think they're hard because they did one hard thing 20 years ago. You ain't hard. You were hard once in history that you can barely remember. And so I know a whole boatload of guys who claim to be hard and who understand mortality based on something that they can barely remember from their just a bit older than being a teenager. And it's not relevant to today. No one can understand their mortality through a fuzzy memory of 2 decades ago. Here's how you remember your mortality: by doing something hard today. I'm not saying put yourself at risk. I'm not saying go balance one foot on a bridge and see if you survive it. I'm talking about doing hard things so you understand what soft things feel like. Go do things that test your mortality to some degree so that you understand what immortality is. And that's my point. A lot of people wandering through life claiming that they're doing amazing things by raising a family, and that's it, that's all. And that is amazing. But that we can do better than that. We all can. There are countless stories. We can't add them all up. Stories of men and women who've raised their family in a righteous way. And that doesn't leave a ripple on the history books. It doesn't leave a mark. That is mortality. You raising a family to the best of your ability, then you die. That is a mortal thing. But immortality is raising a family and then leaving enough marks on a regular basis that you form immortal moments. You can create immortality in your mortal life if you run your program well. And that's not really what I'm trying to do, but I hope that that's an outcome to some degree, that I leave enough marks in enough people's lives that generations from now, not that they'll be talking about me or be talking about that thing that I did, but it will have seeped into the zeitgeist. It'll have seeped into the cultural thread that we all ride on, and hopefully it has some stiction, because nobody is out there telling the story about, hey, there was this guy who raised his family.
It's true.
Well, congratulations, you and unlimited amount of other guys and girls who've done the same thing since caveman days. It ain't a story. The story is creating immortality, in my opinion.
So do you think that it's more about, more about setting the precedent of
No, I think it's
possibility?
It's just a matter of stop being lazy.
Honestly,
Honestly,
yeah,
I do. And I think the reason that there's so much mortal story out there is because there's so much laziness out there. Now, I'm not saying that someone who works really hard for their family is lazy. What I'm saying is you can be comfortable, which makes you lazy. And by being comfortable, you think that I'm doing pretty good. I'm raising my family. I'm checking all the family boxes. That ain't enough to become immortal. That's enough to raise a family. And then where do you lay your immortal hopes? Do you lay them at the feet of your children? Say, I hope they actually make an effort to make a difference in the world, not just in my house. I think it's a big subject that can be considered as important or not, depending on who you are. I think it's important to leave some immortality behind.
I like that. I like that a lot. Any thoughts, Trav, Seb, Julie? Anybody?
Well, I liked Seb's comment on purpose. And as long as you're doing whatever it is you're doing with purpose, I think is sort of the key to life, for me anyways. Because if we're always pushing for that immortal whatever, if we're pushing or striving hard, I'm going to be the top of whatever it is I'm going to be, there's going to be times I need to rest as well. And at what point does pushing too hard become a crutch, or resting too much become a crutch? And I think as long as we can time box it, put constraints around what we're doing, and know why we're doing these things, that we're doing it with purpose, and it's moving towards an ultimate goal of what we find is going to be desirable for us, whatever those ambitions might be, whatever we're doing with purpose. And I like that. You can do nothing with purpose.
Good point.
Purpose can be, I'm going to get up today, and then I'm going to go to sleep tonight.
It's true.
And okay, throw in 3 more things in between those 2 markers. And now you've got 5 things that you've got to do today for purpose. And none of them amount to anything in the grand scheme of things, other than within your own tiny little bubble called the you universe. It has 0 impact on the external universe. It's just you, quote unquote, maximizing between getting out of bed and getting back into bed, the 3 things that make no impact on the world around you.
I think perhaps if there'd be a scale for individuals, like for somebody like Dave Ward, perhaps getting up in the morning and going to bed at night at a certain time in his life would be purpose for him, if that meant that he's going to get up in the morning the next day after that. So I think if that purpose is going to lead to a higher goal of hopefully in the next building block and the next step towards you bettering yourself and those around you. And I guess, the other side is, am I judging somebody else's purpose based on my purpose? or based on what I feel to be altruistic, because there's going to be people who are at risk in the streets and have mental health issues or what have you, that their purpose might be a little bit different. But if everybody can strive towards how they're actually doing something more than just existing, they're getting up the next day because their plan is to do something greater in time.
Well, you're kind of making my point, or that was my point, in the sense of you need to contextualize. If you think that you're running a hard program that's leaving a mark on the planet by getting up and then going to bed, you just haven't contextualized it against your neighbor who's getting out of bed and doing 100 things and then going to bed, or 2 things or 12 things or no things or whatever. The guy across the street is doing this, that, and the other thing. The only way you can understand if you're leaving a mark is to look outside of yourself. Because if you're just looking at yourself, you probably think that you're hard, that you're bad, that you're kicking ass, that you're leading the way, that you are shaping the world around you when you're barely getting out of bed. And if that's all you can do is get out of bed and go to bed for a year, well, maybe that's all you think is possible until you look at what your neighbor's doing. So contextualizing your mortality, what your challenges are, what your struggles are. I think that a lot of struggles can be wiped away by observing someone who is facing really hardship. Now, I'm not suggesting that someone who's struggling doesn't deserve to struggle. All I'm saying is struggle can be contextualized within your own head as mega struggle versus people who are out there mega struggling.
There's no limit to this, though. There isn't.
No, there isn't.
Yeah. So everybody's hard. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. This guy's hard and this other guy's hard.
That's not what I'm saying, though.
No, I know.
Okay.
Let me finish. So the guy. Everybody does things that are hard, contextualized in their own life, and they feel that whatever it is that they're doing on the journey that they embark on is potentially, a more righteous pursuit than the next person. But the problem with that is, right now, as we're standing here with the 15, 20 people that are watching this, there's somebody that has 1 million followers on YouTube saying, what are you guys doing over there? You think you're making an impact? I'm making an impact. So we can start that war of who's making the greater impact and whose purpose is more righteous and all those other things. But it's a lot of self-righteousness. So I agree with Travis in that there has to be a scale in that. Right now, as we speak, let's talk war fighters, for example. As we speak right now, there's guys that are out there that are truly hard. And then there's guys that are looking at them and go, man, you haven't run this. You're not that hard. And then there's guys with the special activity division that are looking at those guys saying 1% of us made it here. You're not even hard. It's like, where does it actually stop? Where does it actually stop?
It stops.
Right?
It stops when someone says, I'm going to start with myself.
Yeah.
And contextualize myself against someone else. I'm not saying everyone should start going hard in absence of contextualization. You've got to always contextualize. I think I'm pretty hard, but not hard in context of my neighbor, we'll say, because I'm viewing the world through a contextualizing filter that assigns me as a 3 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10 or whatever out of 10. But at least I'm starting my day by contextualizing my mortality.
I think it's also important to understand the difference between comparison and contextualization, because it's very easy to compare your life to somebody else's or your actions versus somebody else's. And that can lead down a very negative slope. But a contextualization is more about a removed view, right? You're just looking at the actions itself versus a separate set of actions and then contextualizing against them. And so it can lead to a direct comparison of that person is better than me based off of X, Y, and Z. Whereas I believe what you're trying to get at, Shaun, is the fact that it's more about a detached view of the actions themselves rather than...
It should be a microscope moment. It should be a science moment. You should be in a white lab coat when you're thinking these things.
I like that.
It's almost science.
Get your lab coat on. I'm going to make...
Well, you have to study yourself to see where you're botching it, where you're blowing your mortality, where you're letting it all slip by, because the definition of mortality is we are mortal. We only have so much time on the planet. And so I see mortality as being a frivolous activity if you're not paying attention to it, if you're not contextualizing how much you can do in a day, if you're not figuring out if you've left a mark or not. If every day just slips by, you are the very definition of mortal.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
but if you treat each mortal moment like you're pursuing immortality, now it's got a different definition.
Yeah, that's a good point. Julie?
I was just going to say, I think everyone is different in terms of what your purpose is and challenging yourself. But again, to Shaun's point, you do have to look outside yourself. You can't just always be internally focused in terms of what you're doing or what's challenging yourself. You do have to at some point look at what others are doing, and that helps you to elevate your game, but also to see, there's always people out there doing harder things or challenging themselves more than perhaps what you are doing. So you do have to look outside yourself to put it into context.
But that's the concept of perspective.
Yeah.
Right. That's gaining perspective. So it doesn't necessarily affect. That is necessary for optimization of performance. Like, we know that we need, and not only that, but also to even know where we stand in space and time, which also in turn reduces stress and helps us navigate the rest of life. But perspective, when I look at perspective, I generally do it in sort of, I generally do it to see who has it worse than me, right? Not in terms of my performance, but in terms of whatever it is that's happening. So, when this stuff happened with my injury, whatever the case may be, that could be an injury, it could be issues at work or whatever the case may be. So I'll always, or even lifestyle, like for example, in North America, we've spoke about this, the last couple of weeks, how comfortable we are and everything. Well, when you go somewhere overseas and you get to see what it looks like to actually be fighting for your life daily, it puts things into perspective, and it actually helps increase gratitude, and gratitude feeds right into, your self-image and the things that you do to help others. So I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. Like, you can have purpose, you can look internally, but you also need perspective to know where you stand. So I don't know if that made any sense, but
no, perspective is necessary to define mortality, because today in the Ukraine, there's someone who has far better perspective on mortality than anyone here on this panel.
Yeah.
And so perspective is considered through contextualizing against something. That is what perspective is.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to compare, contrast, context. And so to get perspective on mortality, if you faced enough mortal moments where you may not last another second or another day, well, you probably have a pretty good idea of mortality compared to your neighbor who doesn't have that perspective. But I'm not saying that you've got to get shot at every day to get an understanding of mortality. What I am saying is, in order to understand mortality, you've got to contextualize it against immortality.
Mm-hmm. I think it also, if you're exposed to your own mortality regularly, like when you're getting shot at every day, it becomes benign. Your own mortality, it's like, yeah, well, I get taken out tomorrow, or I get taken out today, or I get taken, like, it becomes this kind of a blasé, like, I'll just do whatever I want right now because I'll be gone tomorrow, or I'll be gone the next day, or I'll be gone the next day. And I think if there's no, as you say, contrast of comfort or security or ability to manage your own mortality, then it can be frivolous. I mean, if you look at, what is it, Detroit, or, South Central LA, places where people are exposed to their own mortality regularly, their sense of mortality is different than someone who voluntarily, say, joins the military and exposes themselves to a period of mortality and then comes home.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense, because if you go in the third world countries or other countries where people are consistently faced with it, there's desensitization, which is exactly what you're referring to, where now it kind of does the other way around. And you're right. In order for me to truly optimize my time and make sure that it contributes to the mission, I need to embrace mortality, but I need to love life enough to do that. Right. So those two things have to work hand in hand, and perspective is the only way to achieve that. So I think it's very accurate. Actually.
That's great. Any
Yeah, to use your example of the barrio as an example, if you've been in enough of them, you will know this, that the stories that are told are not told about every family house on the street. The stories that are told are the neighborhood leaders, as an example, or the mural on the wall that talks about the guy or the girl, the husband or the wife, the mother or father, that was a leader within the community by helping to elevate the community out of intense poverty or no schooling or whatever. So the immortal stories come from people who strive above and beyond the norm, do the hard thing in order to demonstrate that it can affect change. It can leave a mark. It can rise all boats, if you will. So I've been in enough burials, I've seen enough murals, I've heard enough stories, that the stories that are told are the unique stories, not the day-to-day stories of great families being raised by great mom and dads, but those aren't the stories that make the news in the neighborhood. The stories that are made are the immortal stories that will continue on for 3, 4, 5 generations.
There's a great line from the movie Gladiator. He says, "What we do in life echoes in eternity." And I think that's the concept. Is it's legacy. Really, is what you're thinking of. And I think that's it's an important goal. But the concept of legacy changes depending on your background, on what you develop. Because I have friends of mine who grew up in a horrible household, who lots of domestic violence, and had a very skewed version of what family was. And for them, their legacy that they want to leave is children who grew up in a safe and secure environment. And that's the legacy that's what they want to pass on versus what they experienced. And so I think that the understanding that that your legacies each person's legacy is going to be slightly different. And you're right though, Shaun, in a community, the only things that are going to be really risen up out of the ashes to be kind of phoenix-like are going to be the stories of extreme hardship overcome, or extreme work. It's similar to the news cycle, right? You got if it bleeds, it leads, right? The extremity is what sells the story versus the average everyday. So I think we need the contrast as well. We have to have the bell curve of the standard family in order to see the legacy left by this person who raised his family, ran a business, elevated the community, as well. If that makes sense.
I don't want anyone to think that one is better than the other. I'm not contextualizing that individual in a hardship family then went on to raise a good family. That is no less important than a community leader who leads a barrio out of poverty. One is not more important than the other. The main distinction is that one is a story that's never told until just now, versus the community story that is told day after day, year after year, generation after generation. It is the ripple-on effect that I'm trying to draw the comparison to.
Right.
The difference between mortal and immortal, from just a single family to an entire nation, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Any thoughts, Trav, Julie, Sev?
I'm thinking of that saying, "There are no atheists in a foxhole." And when start talking about mortality and people who are getting closer and closer to it, I find a lot of people will look for solace or answers or solutions in any area that they can. Shaun, in your experience, do you think that saying holds true?
I feel like I'm in a foxhole right now. Seb's giving me the laser glare on. I think I went half an inch off of.
Not at all.
I'm only.
You know me.
So I think that to your point, you're bang on for me, but I can only speak for myself. I can't even contextualize myself against another friend that I've got right now because no one's doing 2 live podcasts a day. I wish I had someone who's doing 3 live podcasts a day that I knew, not some big celebrity out there, but someone that my neighbor. At least I'd be able to like look across my fence and shake my head and say, "Oh, bro, I'm glad I'm not you." So I don't have any context. So I've just got me and my own little story to tell, as it were. But I do feel that what I'm doing is hard for me. So it gives me purpose with some context as to not being lazy in life. So I understand my mortality. I work hard against it, hoping to create some form of immortality. But here's the distinction between the gladiator scene where Maximus is about to charge down the hill with all of the horses. I don't feel like I'm doing it for me. I don't want immortality. I want the idea of immortality to be immortal. I don't want Shaun to be immortal. I want the whatever tiny bit of wisdom that is being pushed into me from people who are way smarter than me. If I say the right thing at the right time to the right person, their message from years ago will be passed on to that individual in front of me today. And that's what I consider to be immortal, not Shaun. So I think that I'm just trying to contextualize how I was doing it a few years ago versus how I'm doing it now. I'm trying to chase an extension of my life by passing on wisdom. Not that my name needs to be in the history books, just the ideas that I've come to understand over the years.
I think it's kind of the same thing though, because you're letting you're letting what you do echo into eternity. That is your actions today. It's not about you echoing in eternity. It's about what you're doing. And I think that's part of what we're trying to get at today is the fact that it's not about us specifically. It's not about me. It is about what I can do. And then what I can do is rise all ships, right? I can help elevate those around me. And once I can do that, then I can work to do it again tomorrow. And I worked. Was this.
But I think initially it has to be about us.
For sure.
I mean, you got to start with yourself. Like, if you don't know where your dirty socks are, go find them and put them on and then get to work. And then after a few years of working on yourself, then you can get to work on helping others, I suppose. Yeah. I don't think you should be helping others if you need all the help yourself.
100%.
So mortality requires a phase of your life to like do the hard grind in the silence, I suppose, and figure yourself out. Whether any of us ever do or not, I don't know. But in your mortal life, in our mortal life, there's a lot of work to even get to the point where you can start to share the work. And how you share the work is then also an entire new learning lesson. Like, I feel I've shared my hard life's work wrong in a bunch of ways. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. Even in this conversation, I realize that I'm not doing it well. So I think there's phases of our lives. And at the age of 20, you don't have all phases of life figured out. So how do you deliver immortality at 20 unless you've had a really unique life?
Yeah, that's a good point. Julie, any thoughts?
I mean, I think you do have to Shaun's point, you've got to work on yourself, and then hopefully you can set an example for others and share your knowledge as you move through life. I mean, at that young age, again, that will be a challenge, but as you get older, hopefully you're working on yourself and getting better every day, and then you can share those lessons and set an example for others, and hopefully try to get them to improve and take something away from how you've set your life up as an example.
Indeed. We got a couple. Any other comments though? I got a couple comments here that I wanted to share as well. But anything else on top of your guys' head before I dive into comment town? Good to go. All right. Carl says, I think part of it is how many losses you've had changes a person's viewpoint on mortality. I think this is pretty accurate. And losses in terms of, at least the way I'm reading this, is like struggles or failures, or when you tried and it just didn't work,
or death.
That's the way I'm reading it. But
I'm reading death as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think that's part of it, because even losses, if you lose a lot of your friends early, or especially for guys that have been overseas, and we lose friends while we're out there working, that does change your point of view on mortality for sure. Any thoughts?
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think this individual is getting to the point of death, and so it is a wake-up call. Of course, the more deaths that you've had of people that are close to you, it's going to be a wake-up call, perhaps, for yourself.
Absolutely. It's a challenging thing when you're young and you start losing friends. Or friends or mentors as well. That's another challenge.
Or dogs.
Or dogs. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. That's a really
the things
tough
that
one.
we care about. There's lots of loss in the world.
That's true.
Some of it we're oblivious to. But the stuff that's close to us, the stuff that matters, the important losses, whether they be dog, human, or goals, it's the important stuff that leaves the mark. And again, that's a contextual thing. You can't understand the loss of a dog if you've never owned a dog. That's
a good point. Or had them because I could understand someone, having a dog and then getting hit by a car and it being, 2 or 3 days. That's not a massive loss. It can be, but I don't think it's as big of a loss of having a dog for 10 or 12 years and then having to put it down, because that's a whole nother ball of wax. Another comment we got also from Carl. My grandpa once told me, wherever you are, that is your mission field. I think that's a great line, because that's true. Wherever you are right now, that's what you should be working on in that moment. Any thoughts?
So how come so many people aren't?
That's a good question. Any answers? Anybody got any thoughts on that question? How come so many people aren't working on what's right in front of them?
Because they're being lazy.
Comfort.
Straight up.
100%.
Yeah.
We get distracted.
I
think that's the biggest thing. I mean, you go to a funeral, you celebrate the life, you recognize your own mortality, you put goals into place, and then, as people like to say, life happens. Things come up and they start losing that priority. I know the times in my life when I've almost died, the closer to death I've ever been, the most alive I've ever felt, which is a kind of a strange kind of dichotomy, but some people you'll find will chase that, and they'll keep chasing that over and over because they want to feel alive, and they'll eventually come to that precipice where they've gone a little too far. But I think our attention span for what we can work on tends to be pretty limited, and the amount of things that we should be working on is pretty vast.
Couldn't agree more. That is 100% accurate. Oh, look at that. Carl's jumping in with the response. People are afraid of their potential because they only see the potential of others. Kind of like growth blinders. I like that. Growth blinders. That's cool. I think this is actually more accurate than I initially read it. Afraid of their potential because they only see the potential of others. Interesting. Do you think that has to do with the fact of a lack of
Context.
perspective, being able to contextualize against other people versus compare to other people?
I think so.
Yeah.
And responsibility. There's a certain level of responsibility that one must assume the more that they achieve. I mean, whether that's responsibility they put on themselves or others will put on themselves. But I think a lot of people are afraid of what they can actually do, and that prevents them from trying.
I wonder if it's the imposed, or not imposed, but the predisposed hardness, as to what Shaun was saying, was that, if you're hard in this moment, in 10 years, you're not really hard anymore. If that was the only moment you had when you were
Shelf
hard.
life, man.
Yeah.
And
we're seeking comfort, right?
Seeking comfort.
Yeah, humans are seeking comfort. Like, that's survival. We're always migrating back there. So it's a conscious decision to actually take ourselves and bring us back to where we need to be, so that we can optimize ourselves. So that's exactly what I think Shaun was saying, right? Essentially.
I like that. We do seek comfort, 100%. I do seek the couch. It's a very comfy couch, and it's nice to sit on, but I can't sit on it all day, and I can't. If I tried to get up from sitting on the couch all day, I'd be in pain. So that you lose that comfort once you remove yourself from it. But
and that's in the physical realm. That hasn't applied to any other layers of your life yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Like, that's obviously an oversimplification of the whole concept of comfort.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yet so many people
permeates
do.
Everything. Yeah, agreed.
And I mean, Chance, you and I just had this conversation the other day.
Yeah.
And we won't get into the details of it, but some of this conversation applies to you right now. And generally speaking, how we had to spin it was, if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the team.
Yeah.
Like, pick up the pace for the team, so that the team can see you picking up the pace. And I think that's generally how people have to consider things. If you're trapped in mediocrity and you're not aware of your mortality, well, go do hard things for the team, so that the team can see you doing hard things, so that at least you're helping the team understand that they too can emulate your actions, that they too can go out and rediscover what hard is. The shelf life of hard is short. In my opinion, you need to be doing something hard every day. But if you can't face that kind of heat, then at least every week you got to be doing something hard. I consider being hard or doing hard things is like a bottle of milk in your fridge. It has a freaking short shelf life. You can't rest your laurels on doing something hard 10 years ago. You got to have done something hard this week, or you've got spoiled milk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I have a quote, or I put a post up on my Instagram, and it was from Jocko talking, and I'm gonna share it so that everybody can see it, because I think it applies to what we're talking about. It is fantastic. So give me 1 second while I get it up here. Boom.
I thought you weren't allowed to do that.
Oops.
Did you get
monetized?
Well, that was actually because I was sharing a YouTube video on YouTube.
Gotcha.
So that was a different setup. But so here it is.
You just did. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count.
Can you guys
The
hear
count now is 0. And that's what happens when you wake up in the morning. It doesn't matter what you did yesterday. It doesn't matter how far you ran yesterday. It doesn't matter the workout you did yesterday. It doesn't matter you got on the jiu-jitsu mats yesterday. It doesn't matter you got a promotion yesterday. You wake up today, the count is 0. And that means it's go time.
Earn it every day. It's literally a saying on the teams: earn the day.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I wanted to share it, because that's kind of what, that is what we're talking about, really. And it is, when you wake up in the morning, it's on you. What are you going to do with it?
And yet so many don't.
So how do we get them to? We're going to lead the way, right? We're going to do what we need to do in order to in order to live our lives in that manner. How do we get more people to see that? How do we get more people to
You don't
embody it? No,
just live by example, and the right
That's
people
right.
will will follow, and those that aren't on the same path as you will be walking somewhere else.
And it helps that we have platforms and things that we can have those conversations, because a lot of people that are hearing this for the first time potentially do some introspection. But ultimately, for those that are actually not wanting to do any of this, or for those that are not there, it would be like trying to help somebody with addiction problems. If they do not want to get help, it's almost impossible. It's very, very difficult. So we continue doing what we're doing, and we're doing it in a way that has the potential to affect the collective. And the more this line of thinking is proliferated, the more it'll be difficult to deny. So that's kind of what I think our contribution is, right?
Yeah, I like that a lot. So we're getting short on time here. We're just about an hour. Any final thoughts on personal mortality as a larger construct within society, or anything of what we got? Got this little blue thing sticking off my beard.
Well, it's enough for me to. It's not satisfying. That's a wrong word. It is enough for me to continue doing what we're doing over here, just based on this discussion of challenging myself and everyone on the panel and anyone who's listening to reconsider the distinction between mortality and immortality. I don't want to confuse the term immortality with some sort of weird definition of we're all trying to be gods within our own little universes, or I'm not trying to skew it in some sort of weird way. I'm just simply saying this. If you're thinking like a mortal, then you're not leaving a mark. You need to think immortally in order to make a difference, whatever that means to you.
I like it. Julie, any final thoughts?
That's a great point. You've got to set an example and just live every day like it could potentially be your last, so you're getting the most out of it.
Absolutely. Trev?
You know, I was recently on a hunting trip over in Molokai, and there's a cookhouse, a Kuala Pu'u cookhouse, and they had a sign on the wall that said, "Free beer tomorrow." Well, of course, when tomorrow comes, it'll be today. And I think mortality is sort of a similar thing for people. It's some nebulous endpoint, and they look at it as some sort of an endpoint. And if I look at that free beer tomorrow sort of idea and I kind of apply that to my life, I can rephrase that as, I don't know, one day or day one. One day I might die, or today is day one towards a goal of what I'm working towards.
I like it. I like it a lot. Seb, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with all that's been said so far. I do believe that embracing mortality, but embracing not only mortality as a destination, but mortality as a journey, because that's with every step that we take, we're closer to it, and that's a fact. And the longer you survive, the more likely you are to not. And so I think it's critically important to understand that the things that we see around us are next for us, right? Like you hear this all the time. Somebody gets diagnosed with cancer and they're like, "I was shocked at the diagnosis." Were you though? 50% of people will be diagnosed with cancer. And if they live to be 80, it's almost 100% that will eventually be diagnosed with cancer. So why not you? What makes you so special that you're not the person, right? So it's not just understanding truly understanding the visceral concept of mortality, but understanding that there is no time. Like there is no spare time. There's only time you had and time you no longer have. Get some done.
Yeah.
Now.
I remember talking to Jeff when we had him on here, and we were saying, he was saying, I only have so many weeks left, so I'm going to make the most of them. And I postulated to him that it's not about only weeks left. It's that you have that many weeks left. Like, yeah, man, give her. You have that many weeks left. You could do so much in that time. So
but even that concept implies that he knows how much time there is left.
Exactly. Yeah.
You still don't have that. Theoretically, you have that many weeks left, but something's going to happen right here. So you only, you don't.
Exactly. So
I tell you what, we don't have.
Yeah.
We don't have the approximate 600 breaths that have been taken during this hour-long podcast. I mean, that's my rate of breathing based per minute per hour. So I'm now 600 breaths less. And nowadays I try to make each breath count. So if you aren't counting your breaths, which might seem weird to someone, maybe start thinking about how many breaths just went by that you can't get back. Make them count.
Yeah. And one thing that clicked in my head just a second ago was the fact that death, mortality, all these things, it's not really an end point. We do see it as an end point, right? But it's not. And there's a line in, well, not really a line, but it's from physics, is the fact that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And we are
except for the Higgs
energy.
boson.
What?
Except for the Higgs boson.
Okay, except for the Higgs boson, sure. Or you can let's go throw ourselves into the into the collider. But the concept is the fact that it's just a transfer of state. And that's all it is. And I'll leave you on one quote from
as long as the transfer state is a mark, is knowledge, is immortality. Otherwise, what's it all about?
And I think Seb had a really, really good point there about the journey as well. I mean, so many people say, man, if only I had X amount of money, then I'd be happy. If only I was able to do this, I'd be happy. And you look at the number of people who win the lottery, blow through the money, become addicted, depressed, divorced. I mean, it's just a problem amplifier for them. Or how about one of the richest men in the world, Elon Musk, who was asked, are you afraid of death? And he says, no, not afraid of death. And the reporter was moving on to the next question, and it was a bit of a throwaway statement. And he says, I think it would come as a relief. Richest man in the world is looking at death as a relief. Maybe it's not about the destination, but more about the journey. And if we can enjoy that process that we're on every single day as we're working towards or building purpose within whatever it is we're doing, however meaningful that is to us, I think that will reframe perhaps mortality for myself and maybe others.
I couldn't agree more. Carl ends with this great quote from Kingdom of Heaven. What man is a man that does not try to make the world a better place? And with that, I want to thank everybody. First off, Trav and Julie and Seb and Shaun, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and the collective. It's fantastic. I think that there's lots of really good information over the last hour, and I can't wait to implement it in my day, which will make me better, faster, stronger, more direct in how I live my life and my own mortality. So as we as a collective get better, that means we learn, we grow, we build, and we'll see y'all tomorrow, where we start the count at 0. See you then.
Chimo.
Chimo.